start us moving. It is great to see you at this session. I think a fascinating session ahead of us. Is it time to trust teachers to succeed? The more observant amongst you will have noticed that the session is not being chaired as billed by Chris Husband. Instead, you've got to put it with me instead, I'm afraid. My name is Peter Kent. I'm a head teacher from an 11 to 19 school in Rugby. I'm also this year's president of the Association of School and College Leaders. And since my theme for the year is trust, and trust to transform, I made a special request that I be allowed to come along to this session, not least because I've got to give a keynote at ASCL's annual conference on the theme of trust in 2 weeks' time. So I thought I could sit and listen, or stand and listen, and steal all the good ideas from our contributors today and put them into that keynote. We've got a fantastic panel to explore some of these issues around trust with us this afternoon. And just briefly to introduce them to you, Sean Harford is one of Her Majesty's Inspectors and is Ofsted's National Director for Schools. And prior to joining Ofsted as a HMI, he held teaching and senior management posts in a number of maintained secondary schools. Scrolling down to get to my right part of my notes. Estelle Morris started her career in education as a teacher in an inner-city multiracial comprehensive school where she taught for 18 years, entered Parliament in 1992, and 2001 became Secretary of State for Education and Skills, and followed this with 2 years as Minister at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Since then, she's combined a career that includes senior posts both in education and the arts, as well as being a member of the House of Lords. Pasi Sahlberg is a Finnish educator, teacher and scholar. He worked as a school teacher, a teacher educator and policy advisor in Finland with broad international experience. He has served the World Bank, the European Commission and the OECD, advising governments on equity and excellence in education in more than 50 countries. And he wrote the award-winning book, Finnish Lessons, What Can the World Learn from Educational Change in Finland? And last but by no means least, Bernard Trafford, headmaster of Newcastle upon Tyne Royal Grammar School since September 2008, was previously head of Wolverhampton Grammar School and was also chair of HMC. Bernard's written a number of articles and publications for a whole range of publications. So an incredibly well-suited panel to explore these issues this afternoon. And perhaps if we go any further, we can give them a round of applause to welcome them this afternoon. We thought what might be interesting to do, just before we come on to you and get some of your comments on whether it's time to trust teachers to succeed, but it might be worth just asking each of the panel a particular question around the theme of trust. And Sean, I thought we might start with you, if you didn't mind. And I just want to put, I suppose, one of the questions that's sort of teased out in what we've written about this session in the handbook. Is it naive, do you think, to think that trust without accountability can work?
I think that can depend on the maturity of the education sector where you are, that you're talking about. I think naive is a strong word, but I think it's something you need to think about if you're going to rip away all accountability. And I don't think anyone's suggesting that, and I've never spoken to any educators or union leaders or anyone in the country who said that education shouldn't be accountable to the children, to parents, and to the country, to taxpayers. So I think it's wrong. There's a bit of a dichotomy there, a false dichotomy probably. Can you take away accountability though and let it rip? I think no. But I think the two things aren't at odds with each other. You can give trust to a sector to let them innovate in proportion, to do the things that they think are going to be best for children and young people. But I think then at some point in that cycle, the accountability, and whether it's through monitoring standards, or whether it's through an inspection system, or whether it's through some sort of peer evaluation, I think that needs to be there, because in that way you can then assure the people who are paying for the system and who are using that system that there is some kind of a benchmark of quality. So I don't think it's one thing or the other, and I think they can coexist, but of course you need to get the balance right.
Thanks very much indeed, Sean. Just very quickly before I move on to another point, anyone else on the panel want to make a brief comment on that issue about trust as opposed to accountability?
I think I'd just say that this is accountability is the problem because we become obsessed with it. Do you know, I was once talking to some Chilean teachers and they didn't have a word for accountability in Spanish. They had responsabilidad, which is responsibility, but they didn't have a word for accountability. I thought, I nearly left the country then and moved to Chile. I thought it sounded great. The problems with accountability is if we must have accountability measures, the first myth is that we have to have them, because otherwise we don't know what's going on. That leads to another myth, that if you can't be measured in some way, you can't be doing your job. Or, to put it another way, you're not doing your job unless you can prove it somehow. And then the other thing is, of course, then we get driven by the accountability measures, the outcomes, whereas in fact the task of a teacher, the task of a school is so complex. What happens? Politicians and the media, as guilty as one another, demand simplicity, and it isn't simple. So that's the problems with accountability, I think.
Thanks, Bernard. Pasi, you were going to come in.
Yes, in my award-winning book, Finnish Lessons, that the chairman said that I should not market here, but I promise not to. But in that book, I give a Finnish definition for accountability in school, in education. And I write something like this, that accountability is something that is left when responsibility is subtracted. And just like in Chile, in Finland, we don't have a word accountability in education thing. But I agree with Sean that really in education we should be thinking either or. I think we need both of these things. But if accountability in education system means that we are holding teachers accountable for students' test scores, then I think anybody who is insisting this should also remember that what we see in students' test scores is only about 20% represented by the factors within the school and about 10% about the things that are under teachers' control. So if the accountability means that we are holding teachers accountable for students' standardized test scores in math and reading and something else, then I'm not supporting that type of accountability.
Thank you very much. Let's just stay with you, if that's okay, and follow on, I suppose, with a linked point for taking your international perspective. Would you say there's less trust in the English system compared to the Finnish system, and indeed what you've seen elsewhere?
Is there anybody here who has visited Finland? Is there anybody who would like to visit Finland? Everybody.
Please.
So it's true that there are two types of people in the world. There are Finns and wannabe Finns. But you know, I cannot comment too much about the English society or the English system simply because I don't know too much. But I have a feeling that in my country, our teachers are trusted more than in most other countries in the world in general. And it may be because the teachers are relatively well prepared, that they all have to go through a rigorous and rather long academic training. It may be because the teachers in Finland are probably more experienced than they are here in the United States, certainly more experienced than they are in England, in the United States or England. So this may be one thing. The other one may be that there are some cultural things, and there are some studies and comparisons that are comparing how much people trust one another in the societies overall. And Finland, all the Scandinavian countries are among those where people in general trust one another more than more than in many other countries. You've probably heard about this famous wallet experiment. The wallet experiment was done about a year ago, where people went around the world in about 20 or 25 countries, and they dropped 20 wallets full of money around the capital cities, and then they wanted to see how many wallets come back. And Finland was leading. Finland won that experiment because only one wallet was lost. All the 18 or 19 wallets were returned, which also indicate that there's not only trust, but there's probably some other social principles and behaviors in the society that allow Finnish system to do a little bit different things than in many other countries. That somebody else should speak for the situation in England.
Just ask Estelle, did you have any views on how that compares with the English experience?
Well, I don't know about the wallets, because I was going to ask where England came in that, then I thought you might not know the answer, it might not help the discussion. But just to follow on a bit from that, perhaps a sort of an opening answer to the question. I hate to say, are we asking the wrong question, but there's an element of words mattering and words not mattering. So is it, when we say, should we trust teachers more, I think there's a problem that teachers don't feel trusted. And I think that's slightly different as to whether we trust teachers. I'm not arguing over words there, because I think we've got, some people say the system's really good, but if teachers still don't feel trusted and don't feel that their professionalism is being recognised, we have a problem. So it's no good putting our heads below the bunker and saying, well, I think it's all right. Teachers saying, well, I still don't feel trusted. So I think there is a problem in the relationship between teachers, teaching as a profession, and all those myriad of other organisations who are meant to hold the system to account. Second word is accountability. I don't want to argue over words here, because I'm not quite sure. I think teachers have to be accountable. It's one of the most important services in our country. It spends millions and millions, billions of pounds a year, and it matters what happens in our schools. Now, if there's an easier word than accountability that makes teachers feel less not trusted, I'm happy to use it. But in my mind, it still means accountable. So that notion of having to answer for what you do and having to be responsible, to use the other word, for what you, that's fine. And the third point I'd make is this, that, because I think this is the question that you were perhaps going to ask me before only because he indicates, but like any questions, I don't know all the questions, he just indicated the first questions, which they don't do on any questions. But I think whether teachers, we can move to a point whether teachers feel more trusted, it just builds on what's been said so far. I think it's this, that I trust some of the teachers some of the times on some of the things, as I trust my doctor some of the time on some of the things, some of the conditions. So this notion of that we're all up in arms if we all don't trust all of the teachers all of the time on all of the things, it's a nonsense. It's not a proper professional qualification. So I think this question, it drives me mad. Do you trust teachers? Of course I trust teachers. But am I silly and think every teacher's perfect all the time? No, I'm not. So I almost wish we could reframe that. And I think the way I'd like to reframe it is, I don't think society will trust educators as a profession and as a public service until some key things are in place. The accountability system is one thing, and it's not right yet. I believe it has to be there. I agree with you, Sean, completely. I think it's probably more wrong now than it's been for a very long time, and I think that's a problem. And I'd just throw out two more things that I think have to be in place. I think we have to have a strong evidence base that teachers can use and refer to when making decisions, so that we know that teachers aren't making decisions in a vacuum free from evidence. And the third thing is, I think we've got to have a really robust, high-quality professional development system. This builds on what you said. Because if we've got a sensible accountability system, and I know there's a good quality evidence base which teachers can refer to when making decisions, and if I know we're investing the resources in them to have high-level quality professional development, I trust teachers. But unless those three things are in place, I'm not sure about it. I can't close my eyes and go to sleep and think everything's fine. So I do wonder sometimes whether when we're discussing this question, do we trust teachers? The question we're really asking is, are we as citizens, not as educators, as teachers, are we as citizens all confident that we've put the things in place so that we know teachers can do their job as best as possible without someone looking over their shoulder? And I think we're on that journey. I think we've come a heck of a way over 30 years, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
That's a really helpful and very full response. Thank you very much indeed. Ben, perhaps if I could put a question on trust to you. my own association, Association of School and College Leaders, we particularly linked the idea of trust to school improvement and the idea of a self-improving system. And we've used extensively this quote from Joel Klein: you can mandate adequacy, you can't mandate greatness. It has to be unleashed. So before the system can really start to move on, we're arguing there needs to be greater trust, there needs to be a degree of letting go. I'm just wondering, do you agree, or is again, that being rather optimistic?
I do agree completely, of course. The trouble is, anyone like me, when I'm saying, yep, trust more, I inevitably sound wishy-washy, but I'm doomed to that, I suppose. Because it is always this problem when the accountability gets too fierce. Now, that idea of unleashing greatness, it's not new. Management gurus like Charles Handy, and he was at his height in the 90s or even 80s, were always saying, trust people and you get the best out of them. The flip side, and this is always our danger, and it's danger of heavy-handed systems, if you don't trust people, they prove untrustworthy. And that is the flip side. And that's what is always, I think, overlooked by the people putting policy in there, the people demanding accountability measures. And I think it's always the measures that's the problem. And I really believe we do trust. Vic Goddard, every time I hear him, he says something just so wise. And he was talking about educating ethics, and then he was talking about what he learned. He learned it's the teachers doing it. And of course, when you try to improve teaching and learning in your school as a head, and we all want our schools to be better and better all the time, it's never good enough, I don't think. But it doesn't mean everyone's rubbish, and that's the flip side that the media too quickly picks up.
Exactly
It just, we could all do better. How do you do that? Well, it does start a bit top down, and you get some resistance. I rarely think it's complacency. It's much more fear of change. We're all human. We're all scared of change. And if it's kind of working for me, why would I change it? So you go through that, and what happens? You get exactly what Vic said, which is you get to the point where it's from bottom up. Teachers want to be better. They do it. They fix the teach meets, the sharing of best practice. It's a conversation going on all the time. And, the best teacher improvement, all I do in my school now, when it's going well, the sharing of best practice, I'll pull the tea as far as I can see. They don't need me pushing it. So that's where you get from the trust.
I think you're right on that, but I don't believe you just pull the tea. I think you've done a heck of a lot to get your school to have that environment where that works. And when you hear really good heads like you doing it at school level to engender trust in teachers, I've seen it work so well school after school. What's difficult is to do that nationally in terms of a national strategy, and that's where we fall down. Yeah, so you go into individual schools like yours, and trust reigns because the structures are in place. And I think my argument wasn't that there aren't teachers in school that can be trusted, or schools where that is the overriding ethos. It's just a national level when it's cumbersome with 24,000 schools to sort of get that system in place. It's how to ratchet up what you do.
I think that's the problem. Sean was in the press on Wednesday. I'm not having a go, but I have just got a little quote from you from the Times.
Prepared
from Wednesday.
That's good.
And you said, actually, I don't disagree with what you said, by the way. You'll be all right on this. But it was the complaint from the ATL, and Mary Bustard, the General Secretary, saying, Ofsted inspectors are analysing so much and so much. Anyway, the long and the short was that under fear of inspection, parents are just doing so much work for the sake of it, just stuff, excessive marking and feedback, because that's teachers are being given all that to do. And Sean said robustly that heads were showing a paucity of leadership if they were using the threat of inspections to terrify staff or insist on the unnecessary amounts of paperwork. And of course, that's absolutely true. The only thing I would say in their defense is, if you're a head under pressure, a school under pressure, as soon as you pressurize the system, stuff starts to go wrong. And of course they're wrong. It's our job as heads often to act as the sort of pressure absorber, the shock absorber, between all that stuff from outside, and sometimes pressure from parents and teachers doing the job. But I understand so well why and how it goes wrong.
Yeah, I was in a school in Eastbourne on Wednesday, and we're piloting our short inspections, which is an HMI for a day in a primary or 2 HMI for a day in a secondary school. And one of the things we set up was a group of teachers, and we gave them questions to discuss, and we just sat back and listened to how they discussed them. And it was a really, really interesting session. This school's a good school, still a good school. And we listened to the level of debate and the kinds of things they were saying and the evidence they drew on from their school context. And we said to them, is that an unusual thing for you to do? And because we would normally chair a discussion of teachers where we would sit and just ask the question and probe and stuff like that. And they said, no, it's really not unusual. Every Wednesday after school, we sit down together. We have, that's our CPD model. We're given things to discuss, and we come up with the answers as teachers to do it, much as you were saying your people do, Bernard. So, and I asked them the question, does this ever get said to you in your school? We're doing this, I don't particularly want to do it, but it's just for Ofsted. And they said it's a question that, or a statement that never comes up in that context. Now, my argument is, if that's and that's a good school, it's not an outstanding school, it's just doing a really good job for the students. If they can do it there, and they've been judged good, and they're doing a good job, then why can't everybody have that kind of outlook?
Let's leave that question hanging, as it were. In a moment, I'm going to come to you for some points to put to the panel, so I just want to give you a 1-minute warning to be starting to get some probing questions, thoughts, or comments around the theme of trust. I'm going to just bounce one more question. We'll go around everyone. This is one I didn't warn them about in advance. Perhaps, Pasi, we could start with you on this one. I just would value a thought. Is there one thing we could do to put more trust into our system?
When you say our system, what do you mean?
Answer a question with a question. That's a brilliant tactic. The English education system.
British. Well, I don't know. Maybe you should do the same thing that Finland did in the 1990s to abolish the inspectorate. Am I serious about that? Yes. No, not necessarily abolish, but I think, when I listen to you, and I know probably too little about the inspection system, but when I listen to these types of descriptions of inspecting and controlling schools, I think that you would probably have room here in England for a new type, like a next generation type of accountability and inspection system that would be seen more as professional support or help to schools rather than control. And I don't know, I know many teachers here in England. I just had a breakfast with one of them this morning, and at least based on my experience, what I hear from people, that they still feel that inspection is a threat. It's a kind of it's creating fear. And the problem with that is that as soon as people are behaving under fear, they are not likely to take risks. And if you are not taking risks in a school as a teacher or learner, you are not coming up with anything that would be creative. And if you don't behave in a creative way, you can forget innovation. So as soon as we are asked as educators to prepare young people for creativity and innovation, all those buzzwords that people use within the 21st century education, we can forget those things if there is not safety and trust and security in the schools. And that's why I think here probably, but I'm saying this without knowing too much about the details, but reading about the inspection culture and the system and hearing about it, I think the inspection or accountability 2.0 here in England would probably be a good idea.
Thank you very much. But we'll come round to Sean in a moment to respond. Estelle, one thing we could do?
I think we probably need 3.0, because I think 2.0 was greater freedom for schools and ratcheting up the accountability system, and I don't think it's worked. I think that's the core of our problem, that one is going with the other. We'll give schools greater freedom, but we'll ratchet up the accountability mechanism. And that relationship doesn't and never will sit easy. So I absolutely agree with what you said. My own suggestion would be, as I go on about this, but to redraw the line between politics and the profession. Not to break the relationship, because obviously I think politics got a huge role to play in education, but I think the line is very badly drawn for lots of historical reasons. And I don't think we've got an agreement of where politics stops and professional wisdom and professional, professionalism begins. And I think a proper adult conversation, I'd certainly put it in my manifesto in the next election. I've tried to get my party to do it and failed miserably. But I definitely think along with your 3.0 it would work. So redraw the line. For example, you take decisions about pedagogy away from politicians and you give it to a body who knows about pedagogy. And I very much like the manifesto that has been drawn up this week, that ASCL's drawn up this week, which does begin to follow that line. So I would redraw the responsibilities between the key partners in education based on our achievements as an education system so far.
Thank you, Estelle. Bernard?
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy with both of those. I like the National Education Trust's idea in their manifesto, which is, and it follows what Estelle's saying in a sense, what about a director of education, whatever you call them, a boss, like the NHS has, separated from the politics and from the politicians? At the same time, I would tear up everything else and start again. But that would be a professional with professional advice, not political advice. I'm so old now, I've been teaching so long. I remember starting teaching in 1978, I started, and we were in awe of HMI. I didn't realise you were an HMI. Because they really...
You've got to sit next to him.
Yeah, well, you got a bit cynical with age, don't you? But because when HMI visited, I remember them doing about my second year teaching, and it was fantastic. They were very rude about my French teaching. I was sacked from it after that. I'm not a French teacher, that was the problem. But I was just filling up the timetable. I'm getting off the point, aren't I? The point is, HMI, you can have inspectors that people are keen to work with, talk to and listen from. When it's such high stakes as we have now, you can't do it. So professionals running it, as Estelle says, tear it up and then let's look at what inspection and accountability mean.
And Sean?
I think that I have a lot of sympathy, especially with what Estelle said about the kind of, where we're at now in a cycle. I mean, the reality is, if we go back to the old inspectorate before Ofsted, on average, every school in this country got inspected once every 200 years.
I got once in 18 years, my school, but I was there.
Yeah. So that clearly had absolutely no impact. It was really nice that HMI were kind of recognised as great professionals who go around and do, and as we still say, do good as they went, or do good as you go. But the reality is, it had no impact on the national system. I think that James Callaghan's speech at Ruskin College was kind of a watershed for education in this country. I think then, rightly or wrongly, the RAATA had another enormous impact for a number of different reasons, some good, some not so good with hindsight. I think the evolution of the inspectorate, where HMI then transferred into Ofsted, if you think about the inspections as they were set up, they were originally, typically in a secondary school, 15 or 16 inspectors in that school for a week, going through every department, write a report that was 60, 70 pages long sometimes. I'm sure there's a lot of rich evidence in there, and people still say about the idea of subjects being inspected was a really good thing because it gave great evidence. The reality is now that typically it's in that same size school will be about 4 inspectors for a couple of days. That's an enormous shift in proportionality. You might argue that's at odds with the stakes that have gone with it. That's the question. I think, though, this is an evolutionary process. So, this is my marketing bit after the book bit. In September, we go into this system of sort of short inspections for good schools. Now, good schools in this country now, around about 60% of primary schools, and then a further 20% of outstanding schools, typically, and a not dissimilar figure for secondary schools. This is not a broken education system in this country. This is not what we're talking about. In our reports that we do on our surveys, we focused on, a few months ago, low-level disruption in classes. And that was turned into the media, by the media, as behaviour is awful in the schools of England. Actually, what we were saying was, we've moved on from those situations where behaviour is a massive problem in schools. We've moved on to a situation where now we're focusing on low-level disruption in classes. And actually, I don't know a teacher alive who isn't annoyed by the mobile phone on, the chatter, the note passing, the things like that, the swinging on chairs by children. I'm not talking about special needs children, I'm talking about children who should know better. That annoyed me intensely when I was a teacher. And I think to raise that as an issue is really important. But we're not talking about chair chucking. So we've moved on, and that's an evolutionary process. Are we ready for the next change? I think we are. I think we're ready for a lighter touch, but still rigorous look at schools in that good and outstanding area. But there are still schools in this country that aren't actually good enough for the students. I think we need to remember that. Now, how we work in that system is clearly, you know, debatable, and people have got different views on it. But you know, I think that whether we get rid of the inspectorate or not, we still need some kind of evaluation system. It's interesting, in Finland, you know, the evaluation centre that's been set up there is actually focused on examinations and other measures, and that's the way they're going to do it. The interesting thing, of course, is, and this is not to be pejorative, but the reason we think we know Finland is really good is because of international tests and things. PISA, reading tests as well, stuff like that. They're just tests. And the reality is, how many people have been to Finland? Not very many. How many have sat in lessons in Finland, apart from Pasi here? Virtually none of us. Do we know anything about that education system? We do, because Pasi's lifted the lid off it. But actually, we all need to go and see that. Is that what we would want for our children? Who knows? It might be what we want for our teachers. Is it what we want for our children? It's a question. I don't know what the answer is. But I do know that there's more to do in this country, and it's a maturing system that we need to, you know, work with and within.
I mean, that's a really helpful response. I think actually there's quite a degree of convergence across the panel. Let's see if we can get some comments or questions from you. If you'd like to raise your hand, if you'd like to say anything on this theme of trust, or ask a question, or make a comment. We've got Carol over here. And we've got someone at the back. Let's hear both these comments and then give the panel a chance to respond. Carol, if you'd like to go first.
Carol Jones, ASCL, Specialist for Leadership Development and Teacher Professionalism, formerly a head teacher of 2 London schools. I'm interested that this is the week that ASCL's launched its self-improving system through its blueprint, and Estelle, you referred to that. What do the panel think that a self-improving system might look like that's different from now? And what impact do you think it might have on the recruitment of teachers, because we're at a very seriously low ebb, and the recruitment of head teachers in particular, many of whom have felt unable to continue on this particular accountability system? So what impact do you think a self-improving system might have for the benefits of the students in our schools and for the profession as a whole?
Let's hold Carol's question, take the point at the back.
Hello, my question I think is linked to that, and it strikes me that when you talk about teachers being intrinsically driven towards success, that implies a level of independent and creative and critical thinking, and that comes, Estelle, you mentioned that coming from evidence, which we find probably most robustly in universities like this. With that in mind, what are the implications of some employment-based training routes where people spend less time in university and are only predominantly in one school, where they are most directly exposed to accountability from the very beginning of their careers? And what are the long-term implications of that for intrinsically driven success?
Thank you very much. Estelle, would you mind starting us off on both that question about employment-based routes and also those reflections on the possible power of a self-improving system?
Yes, I mean, I do very much. I've not read every word, but I do very, very much like the pattern of the ASCL manifesto. It's one of the best I've seen. What it made me think is I stopped teaching many years ago, and I stopped teaching in 1992. So I taught from 74 to 92 or something like that. That system wouldn't have worked then. Let me put it in that context. It doesn't sound as though I'm blaming it. It wouldn't have worked then. Be honest, the quality of teaching wasn't good enough for it to take on that responsibility of a self-improving system. The reason I like the ASCL manifesto is I think it's a reflection of the huge progress that the profession and the service has made over the last 20 years. And I think now it can move to that position. And I think that's important for me because it moves us away from saying it's all been wrong in the past and this is the way forward. Because I don't think it's all been wrong in the past. I think we're late changing, but I think now is the moment to move to a model like that because of lots of good things that have been done over the past. How would it change? I think there's clarity of roles of the different players in the system. It goes back to the question I made before. So at the end where you say this will mean for teachers, it will mean for Ofsted, it will mean for whatever it will mean for the government. And that's what I think. There's been so much activity, frenetic over the last 30 years, that we're all standing under each other's toes. And the thing I did like about that, it was a sort out of who did what. So I think the message would be for the profession is we're not a broken system, building on success. The profession is now able to take control and be a self-improving system because other things are in place. And I think the profession's got to acknowledge that. Otherwise, there are some people who interpret it as wanting to go back to life as it was when I taught. And I know no one means that, but I think you've got to say that out loud. We can do this now because of these things. We couldn't have done it before. And in terms of the university, I did a really old-fashioned BEd course when I did my teacher training. And I valued and called on that body of knowledge that underpinned education. Educational psychology, sociology, history and philosophy. I loved studying it, and I called upon it as a teacher. It gave me a professional, academic and intellectual framework in which to look at the school in which I was teaching. Otherwise, to be quite frankly, in an inner-city, multiracial school with a lot of deprivation, there might have been times when it bowled me over and I didn't understand what was going on. I could just get time to think. I could put what a school like that was doing within that context. And I think it has to happen. You don't want to take away the academic underpinning for doctoring, for medicine, dentistry, or veterinary science. Why should we take away the academic underpinning for teachers? So I want it back. The only thing I would say is I don't think it all has to be at the start of the course. I've seriously not been made to do any of that academic work since. I've chose to read things. So I think it's important to fight the corner for that. But I think we need a broader view about how and when into a teacher's professional life it actually comes.
Thank you very much. Should we just get a few more comments from our audience, and then others can come in on those and other link points? Thank you very much.
My name is Susan Okereke. I'm a teacher, a maths teacher, a lead practitioner. The whole idea of teachers having trust and success, and I think a lot of teachers don't feel that because of a lack of consistency within schools. I've been in 3 mainstream schools, and I think the lack of consistency when it comes to leadership and the disconnect between senior leadership and the rest of the school is a massive issue, and also fairness. And I think with a lot of the freedoms of these academies has led to teachers being, it's not just workload, it's the way teachers are being treated. And that's why a lot of teachers are leaving the profession, because they don't trust it anymore. Not just they don't feel trusted. Like, what advice do you give, or what do you think should be done to help consistency and leadership across all schools in this country? Because I think it's a major problem.
Thank you. No, I think it really, because we talked a lot about trust in terms of government and profession, but you've touched on this really important point about between school leaders and the professionals who work within the school. Pasi, would you give us a sort of an international perspective on that first of all? Do you think that there are things that leaders can do to sort of show trust to the colleagues who work with them?
Yeah, I try to do that. The one interesting thing internationally that has happened now, I think it's probably partly because of this increasing focus on holding teachers accountable for the students' learning is that the role of leadership has been put aside a little bit. And for example, if you look at this conversation and dialogue in the United States right now, very few people speak about school principals. They don't actually use the word principal anymore, or school head. They're all administrators. And that's why it seems to me like the role of the leadership is a little bit put aside. I think we cannot really, I cannot imagine creating a culture in a school where teachers would be seen as professionals or trusted without having a school leader who understands what's going on in the classrooms and what the teachers are supposed to do. So I don't know, that's my experience from Finland, for example, is that the last 25 years we have really invested in developing and enhancing the role of school leaders as a, I also like this concept of self-improving system, because you cannot have a self-improving system without leadership, somebody who is leading that at a local level, and that's why it's a critical, I think, in this particular question.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Bernard, as the head teacher on the panel, would you like to say any more on that?
Yeah, I think my vision of the school of the future, to go back to that first question, where it's really self-improving, how it would feel would be those great days when it all goes right in school. They happen occasionally, And it is sometimes those times when you get together with your teachers and they are just full of ideas and you think, oh my God, we can do anything now. So the more of those days we can get, the better. Leadership, yes, it does need constant support. It was Tony Blair's great idea, the National College for School Leadership, and it's been subverted. You know, one little regime after another has messed around with it, both major parties, so it's not political, it's just politicians. But
we didn't make it to Quango, we didn't make it to put it back into the department.
No, that's true. But then everyone shoves other stuff into it, and so it's lost that focus. And I think that's a shame. I don't think it got its mission right at first, and that didn't help. But we do need to be sort of proud of leadership, but say we all need help in it. And of course, you know, I've been head for 25 years. It's time someone shot me, really. But how do you keep fresh? Well, you don't keep moving on, I don't think. I've only done 2 headships. So what you do is you have to get out, see other schools, go on courses, go on big stuff sometimes to make you think. That's what you do. I have, in terms of leadership of schools, and Pasi just said an important thing. It seems to me, as the leader, you are the lead professional, you have to still understand about the teaching, even if you don't teach. I worry about the idea, which is just one of convenience now, that if you've got a great school leader, let them run about 5 schools. Because as soon as they've got this, then they're not alongside that teacher who's gone through a tragedy. They're not, you know, feeling their pain or their joy. And it's all about people's schools. And I think if we distance leaders, then they just become effective managers, and we've lost the human dimension. So we need more leaders, and we need more good leaders.
It's all about people. Powerful thought. We've still got a little bit more time to take a few more questions or points or comments. Thank you very much. We'll just take the microphone to our colleague here at the front.
Hi, my name's Kenny. I'm from a school in Harrow, Bentleywood High School. My question to the panel is, I think part of the frustration for teachers is around this idea of accountability and the fact that there's this idea that if you don't measure something, it doesn't exist. But actually what happens is the reverse, where people begin to do this song and dance to show that something exists, whereas actually there's a ton of things that schools do that are really adding value to young people that doesn't get measured, that doesn't get noticed, and doesn't get celebrated. And what ends up happening is we end up sort of playing this song and dance to try and show that we're doing something. And I guess my question is kind of twofold. You've got that issue around accountability and Ofsted, and then you've got the issue of the league tables where schools and head teachers know that actually if you've got a high rate of exclusions, that's going to affect how you're seen by parents, it's going to affect how you're seen by Ofsted, and the spotlight gets shone on you. And I think what happens is then we start playing the game, and you get students who should be expelled, who aren't expelled, and they're kept in school, and it affects the learning. So I guess, again, my overarching question is this issue of Ofsted and other agencies kind of meddling almost, and not allowing teachers to do what they know best to do. I just wonder if panel members could speak to that, and if you can connect with that frustration.
Sean, I think we have to start with you on that particular one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that connects with the earlier questions, because a colleague at the back said about what is, everyone would agree what we're trying to achieve with children, young people. I'm not actually sure we will get agreement on that, because lots of people think it's about the qualifications they get at the end of their compulsory schooling. Others will see it about being a rounded person, a good citizen and what have you. So we need to kind of think about that a bit more, about what we mean by success, I think, to start with. I think the accountability system hasn't helped with this over the years, and Ofsted played its part in that as well, in focusing on things like literacy and numeracy very specifically. I will give a bit of mitigation though there, in that actually literacy and numeracy wasn't good enough in youngsters when they were getting to the end of Key Stage 2, and then it wasn't enabling them to work to the levels they could through secondary school. So there was a reason for it. But of course what happens is that was driven by measures, as you say, and then the thing was then, well, how many of the children are getting level 4 and above it, and all that kind of stuff. I totally understand that. I think that, what we're trying to do now is take the lid off that bit and say, yeah, but the broader curriculum is really important. Now, I think some things have been done over time to try to help that, but I'm not sure they've been successful. So, for example, taking away the Key Stage 3 tests when they were taken away was supposed to open that up a bit. I actually think it didn't. It didn't have the effect it was supposed to. I think almost there's an argument, and you can argue whether tests are the right thing or not. I think there's almost an argument to actually test children on all of their subjects at the end of Key Stage 3 to raise the importance of all of them. Because at least then we'd have some kind, if people are hung up on measures, at least then everyone would be getting a piece of the pie. Now, that might not be the right thing or what have you, but you know, we've got to think about this. And as soon as we focus in on one or two things, then that's the problem. But I think absolutely the idea that, you know, we want a broad and balanced curriculum, that has been brought into sharp relief in the last year with things like the schools in Birmingham, with the schools recently in Durham, a number of other things that we've seen happening that just weren't right for those children. So the broad and balanced curriculum is really important, and it gets to what you're saying. I will just pick up on the ASCL self-improvement issue or document. You know, we're not allowed to endorse things. Clearly, I've read it in great detail, as Peter knows. And actually, I think there's some really good things in there about how we can develop the system next. I think the easy thing is for certain bodies, associations, whatever, to knee-jerk and say, get rid of it and start again and do, yeah. Well, actually, the position that Peter's guys are putting forward is another step in the evolution. And I think that's the way to go with this, because it gives you a step forward, it gives you a route map, if you like, to where we want to go. And one of the questions was about, you know, what would you see then as this self-improving system? And I think I can see that where, and it does go back to this word accountability, or whether we want to use responsibility or whatever, but I think we need to be able to give that accountability and responsibility over to the sector to be able to do it for themselves. I personally don't think that ISI as an inspectorate have got this exactly right either. I think there's, you know, it needs to be rigorous and hard edge. I'm not saying it isn't from ISI, but I'm just saying, you know, we can learn things, all the inspectorates can learn things from each other. But I think we do need to be able to transfer that kind of responsibility back to a sector to start improving itself through those methods. But on the way, we need to make sure that the safety nets are there so that we can get to that position safely. So.
Thank you, Sean. Pasi, have you got any views on how we promote this breadth and value that breadth rather than focusing on too narrow a set of measures?
I don't know. I rather let my colleagues here who are closer to this problem than we are to speak about that. Maybe Estelle, maybe you want to say something.
I think it's a really tough question. I mean, we all know the problem. It's really difficult to find the answer. I think my only addition, because I think what you said was right, and I agreed with a lot of it, is that schools should have the confidence to value and celebrate achievement that isn't measured. I think it's something that has to come from the school, because I'm not sure nationally it's not easy for government to do that, and so therefore I think we look to the wrong player. But when I go around, really, you know, see schools, I go into loads of schools, as you must, where arts and music and that broad education are really cherished and valued, and every kid in that school knows that what they've achieved in that matters. And somehow it's difficult to put words around it, but where we are at the moment, that almost needs to be enough. And those schools want more than that. They want it to be valued nationally, but we mustn't lose the fact that some schools are managing to do what the national system is, you know, singularly failing to do as far as that broad and balanced curriculum is concerned.
I mean, I would add to that, Estelle, that I think we've got ourselves into a mindset we have in the past that it's one or the other.
I know,
you know, it's literacy and
exactly
numeracy,
right.
or it's a broad and balanced curriculum, and also you make the choice. You're telling us what to do. That's a false dichotomy, because everybody knows
good
that
schools do
the good schools do both, all of it, and they support children to become that rounded person through a broad education, and that's got to be the right thing. It can't be right that, you know, you say that children can either read and do maths, or they can be a balanced person and have a world view and all that. It just is a false dichotomy.
I think. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I was just getting up this morning, and there was Ed Miliband's idea that because we're so concerned that kids aren't doing creative subjects enough because of the concentration on others, that then Ofsted, little job for you, have got to inspect, under his government, Ofsted will inspect, and you couldn't be good or outstanding if you didn't have lots of arts in it. And then I think, that at that point, the lunatics have taken over the asylum. But there is a nasty thing that I have to live with, a fact I wish it weren't true, but I became a head just before someone invented league tables, and it wasn't the government at the time. Funny enough, it was the Daily Telegraph, and then the government said, well, we'll have some of that, and we've been stuck with them ever since. Somewhere around then along came Ofsted, and 92, there we are, and that was certainly seen from the first moment as an enforcer. And the awful thing is that actually there was a step change in standards achieved. From being amateurish about that, schools had to get their act together. And I mean, even very powerful schools suddenly thought, we better actually make sure we get the results right as well as other things. So, it's unfortunately, amid a lot of bad and a lot of damage along the way, there was something there. So, Sean's right. You don't actually tear it all apart, but we are surely ready to be much more grown up now. And I don't think inspecting for creativity is going to add very much. No offence. I think it might be asking a little much of your guys.
I'm not.
Oh no, are you in Perdar yet?
Yeah. I'll stop us going quite down that line, because that could take us into another discussion. Panel, you were described at the start. In the write-up of this session as 4 of the sharpest observers of schools, and I think you've shown yourselves worthy of that description. Can we give them a round of applause to say thank you very much indeed?
I'll write that down, I might forget it. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.